This is a historical channel, and Kabul fell just days ago. But that event is now history and shows Americans how leaders openly lie about current events. Some newsmen compared the chaos at the Kabul airport with scenes of the rapid fall of South Vietnam in 1975. Here is a clip of the Da Nang airport in Vietnam.
Reports from Saigon said thousands of people were roaming Da Nang airfield. But as the plane landed, this did not at first seem evident. But then people poured from behind buildings and revetments, racing on cars, jeeps, trucks, Hondas, and on foot, desperate to get to the plane and make sure they got on before anyone else.
One guy got on.
As soon as the rear stairway was lowered, the stampede of terrorized people tried to storm the plane. From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control. Several times the pilots moved the plane, hoping to break the crowds around the rear ladder. There was no control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The hordes tried to jam up the stairway as Daley himself tried to block the stairs. As men clambered over one another, pushing aside women and children in their panic-stricken fury, members of the air crew dragged them onto the plane, trying to fill it as fast as possible. The tension and panic intensified. The heavily armed men were menacing. They left their wives, their children, their aged parents on the runway while they forced their own way on board, a rabble of young enlisted men. CBS News cameraman Mike Marriott and soundman Mai Van Duk dared not leave the plane, aware they might not be able to get back on. One newsman was left behind as the crowd pushed him out of reach of the plane. The stewardesses dragged people on and rushed them to seats, screaming all the while, "Where are the women and children?" They piled 4, 5, and 6 men into seats intended for 3. Finally, there was room for no more. The plane began to move as people still clambered up the ladder. Angry men left behind fired pistols and automatic weapons at the plane, determined that no one would go if they couldn't. A grenade went off under one wing, damaging it. Unable to move on the blockaded runway, the plane raced down the taxiway, swerving to avoid abandoned vehicles, perhaps even running over people. As the plane strained laboriously into the air, people were still clinging to the wheels and the rear stairs. 7 men fell off as the plane reached heights of 1,000 feet or more. As the plane reached 6,000 feet, 1 man was still stuck in the ladder. Daley had to climb out and pull him back as the plane swerved and shuddered under its heavy load. As calm fell on the smug men who had managed to fight off their friends and relatives to get on, the hard-working cabin crew took account. 268 people were on board, among them 5 women and 2 or 3 small children. The rest were some of the men whom President Thieu said would defend Da Nang.
Pictures appeared in the media showing American helicopters involved in the mass evacuation in 1975 Saigon that looked like those involved in the mass evacuation of Kabul. American Secretary of State Antony Blinken assured Americans the 2 events were much different and that an orderly evacuation was underway.
President Biden is intent on avoiding a Saigon moment. That's a reference, of course, to the hasty and humiliating U.S. evacuation from Vietnam. But with this troop surge to airlift Americans out of Afghanistan, aren't we already in the midst of a Saigon moment?
No, we're not. Remember, this is not Saigon. We went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission, and that mission was to deal with the folks who attacked us on 9/11. And we have succeeded in that mission. The objective that we set, bringing those who attacked us to justice, making sure that they couldn't attack us again from Afghanistan, we've succeeded in that mission.
Blinken paid no attention to video of American helicopters dangerously clearing people off the Kabul airport runway. Blinken was correct to say the effort to establish a vassal state in Afghanistan had failed, but repeated the official lie as to why the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2001. This is explained in the tale linked below, The Empire's Fake War on Terror. Osama bin Laden was never the leader of al-Qaeda since it was never a real organization, although he did lead 100 Arab nationalists who lived in Afghanistan. He had nothing to do with the famous September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States and learned about it from the media. Osama bin Laden was wanted by the FBI before and after the 9/11 attacks, only in connection to 2 embassy attacks in Africa. The American government blamed a Kuwaiti for the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, pictured here, and a dozen Saudis who were said to have died in airplanes. These persons had never been to Afghanistan and were said to have planned and trained for the attacks in the Philippines, Germany, and the United States. Yet the United States invaded Afghanistan after the Bush administration suggested that Osama bin Laden was responsible. Once the war on terror was underway in remote Afghanistan, victory seemed at hand as Osama bin Laden was located in the Tora Bora Mountains. His only possible escape route was to Pakistan through rugged mountain passes. The CIA officer in charge of finding him, Gary Bernstein, asked that the 800 U.S. Army Rangers assigned to support his mission be airlifted to block these escape routes. Bernstein wrote a book about this operation, Jawbreaker, where he complained that permission to trap bin Laden was denied by the White House, and bin Laden escaped. Killing or capturing bin Laden at Tora Bora would have quickly won the war on terror in the minds of Americans, but he was just a ruse. The Bush administration planned to use the myth of a worldwide al-Qaeda threat as an excuse to invade other nations. The rapid fall of Kabul was embarrassing because the United States spends around $100 billion each year to collect foreign intelligence. The CIA and U.S. military intelligence have been on the ground in Afghanistan for 20 years. It was obvious that deals were made between the Taliban and the Afghan army to avoid fighting, yet American intelligence agencies seemed unaware this might happen, evidenced by what President Biden said about the situation in Afghanistan just 1 month prior.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place.
And do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam with some people feeling...
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Given that the Afghan army was far larger than the Taliban, far better equipped, and supported by air power, what happened? What will happen next?